Egypt. Most people imagine pyramids and the Sphinx, right? But I found a mysterious building in the city of Cairo. A tower reminiscent of Angkor Wat. Carvings resembling Hindu deities. It is a strange and beautiful building that looks like a temple in India or Cambodia. Islam is the mainstream religion in Egypt, and there are also people who practice Christianity. But I have never heard of a Hindu temple here. Wondering about this, I asked a local resident living in Cairo. I was surprised. This building was not a temple at all. What's more, it is said to have a terrifying ghost legend known only to the locals. In this video, as we walk through this mysterious palace remaining in Cairo, we will explore its legend and the truth behind it.
Heliopolis, the dream city, born in the desert.
The true identity of that building. It was a mansion, built in the early 1900s by a Belgian industrialist, Baron Empain. It is called the Baron Empain Palace.
It looks like a temple, but it's a palace?
That's right. But it is not just a strange house built by a millionaire as a hobby. This palace was the landmark of Heliopolis, a new town developed by Baron Empain in the desert area. Heliopolis was a new town in the desert, created in the early 1900s for Cairo, which was facing population issues. Its name is derived from an ancient Egyptian city. And it was not just a residential area. European-style buildings, trams connecting the town with central Cairo, the luxurious Heliopolis Palace Hotel, and Luna Park, the first Western-style amusement park in Africa and the Middle East.
Wow, he even built an amusement park in the desert in the early 1900s.
Heliopolis was a resort city, a residential city, and a symbol of modernization. And built as the landmark of that dream city was Baron Empain's own residence, the Baron Empain Palace. Of course, it was not built as a haunted house. It was a symbol of an era that tried to create a new future in the desert. However, its appearance was all too unique for the citizens of Cairo at the time. Why was a palace reminiscent of Angkor Wat, or an Indian temple, built in Egypt's new city?
The strange palace that dreamed of Asia.
Let's observe the Baron Empain Palace as it stands today. The shape of the tower somewhat reminds us of Angkor Wat. On the walls, there are carvings like the celestial dancer Apsara and the Hindu god Krishna. Its appearance reminds us of a temple in Cambodia or India rather than a palace in Egypt. On the other hand, there are also Western art sculptures, a European-style room of mirrors, and a spiral staircase.
But why use an Asian design in Egypt?
In the early 1900s, a strong interest in Asia was spreading across Europe. One of the major catalysts was the 1900 Paris Exposition. France created an exhibition incorporating the style of Cambodian temples, which they had colonized. European people were shocked by its novelty and awakened to the mystery of Asia.
So this palace represents Asia as imagined by Europe at that time, right?
I think you could say that. However, the shadow of the times soon began to fall upon the dream city of Heliopolis. In 1914, World War I broke out. Under wartime conditions, the Heliopolis Palace Hotel and the Luna Park amusement park were converted into hospitals.
The dream city became a war hospital. The atmosphere suddenly changes.
That's right. Heliopolis, which had been a resort area, was heavily affected by the war. Consequently, the Baron Empain Palace also began to take on a somewhat unsettling aura that could not be described by beauty alone. A strange appearance, carvings of foreign deities, the atmosphere of the town changing because of the war. Before long, people began to layer various stories onto this palace. What I am going to tell you next is not a world confirmed by historical facts. It is the legend of the Baron Empain Palace that has been passed down locally.
I'm getting chills.
The legend beginning in the Room of Mirrors.
From here on, these are not stories confirmed as historical facts. This is the legend of the Baron Empain Palace, told by the local people. The legend of this palace does not start suddenly with ghosts. What first captured people's imagination was the mysterious structure of the palace itself. The first thing talked about is the Room of Mirrors. Even in the current palace, there is a beautiful room equipped with mirrors. But according to legend, there used to be a room in the palace whose walls were entirely covered with mirrors. The Baron hated letting people into that room, and it was said that he would lock himself inside alone, performing something like incantations. Such rumors have been passed down.
An incantation alone in a mirrored room? That is quite creepy.
A mirror does not simply reflect one's appearance. It can also reflect human presence, or even the invisible. It is a tool that easily invites such imagination. That is why the room surrounded by mirrors became a special place within the legends of this palace. And the next thing mentioned is a secret underground passage. There is a rumor that an underground passage connects the palace to the Heliopolis Basilica about 1 kilometer away. Such a rumor exists.
Connected all the way to the church underground?
It is strictly a legend. However, there is one fact. Baron Empain now rests in the crypt of that Heliopolis Basilica. In other words, in the legend, the palace and the Baron's resting place have been spoken of as being connected underground.
So, it's a story that the place where he lived and his grave were connected by a hidden passage.
Exactly. And there is another famous legend. The rotating tower. The Baron Empain Palace has a tower that overlooks the city. In the legend, it is said that this tower used to rotate slowly. Moreover, among the people at the time, it was rumored that this palace was designed by an Indian architect. And that architect was believed to be using magic to make the tower rotate.
A tower that rotates by magic? That is pure fantasy.
Yes, but this is the interesting part. The room of mirrors that no one could enter. The underground passage rumored to lead to the burial site. The tower believed to move by magical power. What these legends have in common is that this palace was not viewed as an ordinary building.
The longing and mystery toward distant Asia were layered with the fear of its strange appearance, weren't they?
Yes. Fearing the unknown is a human psychology, shared even by modern people. Now, the legend of the Baron Empain Palace does not end with the building alone. Eventually, the story moves toward the people who lived there. The tragedy of the Baron's family.
The tragedies layered on the Baron's family.
The legend of the rotating tower has another eerie continuation. Among the people back then, it was rumored that this palace was designed by an Indian architect who used magic. However, no one had ever seen that architect. Because of this, a story like this was born. It is said that the Baron, wanting to elevate his own fame, arrived at a terrifying idea.
I want to make this building filled with magic, the only one of its kind in the world. If he stays alive, the same thing will eventually be built somewhere else. Before that happens, with my own hands.
The Indian architect sleeps beneath the soil of the palace. Such a legend is told.
He buried the architect just for fame? If that's true, it's completely the beginning of a curse.
Yes, it is strictly a legend. However, this story is important even among the ghost stories of the Baron Empain Palace. This is because it is said that following the death of this architect, misfortunes began to occur one after another in the palace. As if the curse of the murdered architect haunted the palace and the Baron's family. First, the family's very first victim was the Baroness. The palace cook noticed liquid dripping from the food service elevator. Oh no, did some soup spill? Thinking so, when he opened the door, there was only the Baroness's head, staring back at the cook.
That is quite intense.
Furthermore, misfortunes occurred one after another to the people involved in this event as well. The cook who found the Baroness's head, the manager, the maids. It is said that they too met mysterious ends one after another. Moreover, the legend extends to the Baron's immediate family. The Baron's brother met a mysterious death, and the Baron's sister fell from the palace's spiral staircase. People began to suspect the presence of evil spirits, and the Baron himself reportedly prayed in the room of mirrors to protect himself from the evil spirits. Of course, these are legends told locally, and the details vary depending on the storyteller.
It feels like a mansion where misfortunes chain together, rather than just a single incident.
Yes. In the legends, it was a mansion that led its residents to tragedy. That is how it was spoken of. And the legend becomes even denser. Next to be told is about the Baron's daughter, Anne, and an even stranger story surrounding her friend Sylvia.
Anne and Sylvia.
The Baron's daughter, Anne. According to legend, Anne grew up lonely inside the palace from a young age. The room of mirrors that no one could approach, the walls carved with foreign deities, and the palace that fell completely silent at night. One day, Anne found an unfamiliar little bird in the garden. The little bird flew off as if inviting her. Anne followed it, left the palace garden, and wandered into another nearby palace. There, she happened to meet a girl named Sylvia.
Meeting by being guided by a little bird sounds like a fairy tale.
It does. However, this story gradually moves in a dark direction. Sylvia gave Anne a mysterious drawing as a gift. Anne liked the drawing and displayed it in her room. However, around this time, Anne's behavior began to change little by little. She began sneaking into that room of mirrors together with Sylvia. Rituals trying to summon something in exchange for a bat's life, while playing strange music. And the drawing that Anne received, it was an inverted cross, which is said to be a symbol of Satanism. Yes, Sylvia was a Satanist.
From a fairy tale-like meeting, it suddenly turned into a horror-like atmosphere.
Eventually, their rituals led to a death. A certain cleaner witnessed Anne and Sylvia's strange game. It was a Ouija board. It is a game to communicate with spirits, similar to Kokuri-san in Japan. That cleaner later met an inexplicable death. That is how it is told.
Out of half play, they touched something they shouldn't have touched. That's how the story goes, right?
Yes. And the story turns toward Anne herself. In the legend, it is said that Anne gradually lost her mind. She began talking to invisible things inside the palace. She stopped coming out of the room of mirrors. She was conversing with someone in an empty place. And finally, Anne's body was discovered inside a well.
Oh no, what an ending.
The story of Anne and Sylvia became the trigger for speaking of the Baron Empain Palace, not just as a haunted house, but as a place connected with the demonic. However, this image of Satanism did not end with the old legends alone.
The Palace in Ruins, and Rumors of Satanism.
Due to the legends surrounding Anne and Sylvia, the Baron Empain Palace came to be spoken of as a place linked to the demonic. However, this image did not remain only within the old legends. As time passed, the palace gradually left human hands. The palace that was once the landmark of the dream city, Heliopolis. However, the owners changed, and without any progress in restoration, the building gradually fell into disrepair. The beautiful decorations were damaged, graffiti was left on the walls, and the atmosphere of a ruin began to drift through the rooms that were once elegant.
So the Dream Palace gradually started to look like a real haunted house.
That's right. And in the 1990s, young people began entering this ruined palace. Ruins at night, unmanaged rooms, graffiti left on the walls, loud music in the dark, drugs, and young men and women.
So the old legends of Satanism became tied to modern youth culture.
Yes. The media at the time reported on the youth who entered the palace by linking them to Satanism. However, we need to look at this carefully. It is a fact that young people illegally trespassed into the ruined palace. However, there was no evidence that satanic rituals were actually conducted there.
In other words, facts and rumors mixed together again.
That's right. Ruins are places that easily gather people's anxieties. By overlapping the old ghost legends and the trespassing incidents, people viewed the place as increasingly eerie.
Perhaps what is truly scary is not the ghost itself, but rather how people's imaginations keep expanding.
That is absolutely true. In 1982, nearby residents witnessed thick smoke coming from the palace. And though police and firefighters rushed over, no traces of fire were found. Such a story is also passed down. Anxiety creates supernatural phenomena, and supernatural phenomena create further anxiety. I think there was such a structure at play. Next, we will finally move away from the legends and unravel this ghost story from the side of historical facts.
Unraveling the legend through history.
So far, we have looked at the legends surrounding the Baron Empain Palace. But here, let's step away from the legends for a moment and re-examine them from the side of verifiable historical facts. First, the major one is the legend of the Indian architect. It was said that the palace was designed by an Indian architect who used magic, and the Baron buried him. But, confirming the records, the architect was not Indian. The one who designed this palace was a French architect, Alexandre Marcel. Marcel was an architect who was also involved in the Cambodian exhibition, reminiscent of Angkor Wat, at the 1900 Paris Exposition.
Perhaps the Baron wanted to show the citizens of Cairo the Asian architectural beauty that moved his heart at the World Exposition.
I think so too. Next, the rotating tower and the underground passage leading to the burial site told in the legends. The palace has undergone modern restoration, but neither has been discovered. As a fact, Baron Empain rests in the crypt 1 kilometer away. However, no underground passage has been confirmed.
So parts of it are true, but imagination has been added to it.
Rather than stories created completely from scratch, I believe imagination was layered onto those fragments of reality. We also need to look at the tragedies of the Baron's family with the same caution. In the legends, it was said that the Baroness, brother, sister, and servants met mysterious deaths, one after another. However, at the very least, the palace did not become completely ruined immediately after the Baron's death. It is known that the Baron's son, and even the generation of his granddaughters, lived in the palace.
True. It's hard to imagine that granddaughters would live until their generation in a mansion where so many people met inexplicable deaths.
In other words, several of the legends of the Baron Empain Palace are clearly not facts. However, I think it is also a bit wrong to dismiss them as mere fabrications. A strange appearance, events that appear inexplicable, the time it spent as a ruin. When those overlapped, people likely layered stories of curses, ghosts, and Satanism onto this palace.
So, while legends are not the facts themselves, they are a record of people's emotions.
Exactly. Next, finally, let me introduce the Baron Empain Palace as it is today.
The revived Baron Empain Palace.
This palace has reclaimed its former appearance. The palace, which had been neglected for a long time, was restored by the Egyptian government and opened to the public in 2020. Today, it welcomes visitors as a museum that conveys the history of Heliopolis. In the garden, a tram symbolizing Heliopolis is also on display.
The place that was feared as a ghost palace has now become a place that tells the history of the city.
Walking through it in person, this palace was truly a mysterious space. The Apsara I saw at Angkor Wat, the Krishna I saw at an Indian temple. I never expected to see them here in Egypt. European art and Hindu art coexist within the same space. I don't know of any other place like this. I was deeply shocked. Both the palace and the gardens are beautifully maintained, making it not a scary space at all.
Hearing the legends made me a bit defensive. But now I see there is such a beautiful palace in Cairo. I want to visit it.
The desert new town of the 1900s. Please lose yourself in thoughts about the scenes and people of that time. When you visit Cairo, please make sure to go there. Anne might even come out to welcome you.
Hey!
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching.
Anne might even come out to welcome you. Thank you for watching.
Curiosity connects us all. If you love discovering real culture, please subscribe this channel